Okay, Dr. Lewis, why don't we get started?
Okay, great. Good evening and welcome to this special CDS member town hall meeting. I'm Dr. David Lewis and honored to serve as your 2024 president. Over the last year, the Chicago Dental Society has undertaken a significant initiative with a complete review of the bylaws that govern our 160-year-old society. This town hall meeting has been scheduled to assist in providing all of you, our CDS members, the background information and share with you the steps taken to accomplish the monumental initiative of revising the CDS bylaws. I'd like to introduce tonight's panelists. First, we'll hear from our Chief Executive Officer, Heather Nash. Heather joined CDS to lead the society in May 2023 and brings over 30 years of association management and leadership experience. Second, we have Kimberly Pendo, who serves as CDS legal counsel and founding member of Chicago Law Partners, LLC. Kimberly practices not-for-profit and corporate law, counsels not-for-profit organizations on all aspects of their business and operations, and serves as the firm's chief operating officer. Lastly, Dr. Mike Durbin, our immediate past 2023 CDS president, who served as the chair of the Bylaws Task Force. Mike has worked tirelessly along with the 5 task force members over the last 8 months to bring the bylaws revision to the board of directors and ultimately you, the CDS members, for approval. We encourage you to submit all questions through the chat button located on the bottom of your screen. We have staff monitoring the chat for questions and to ensure all member questions are answered. The town hall will be recorded and posted on the CDS website by tomorrow morning. We have allotted 90 minutes for this town hall meeting, and should any questions remain unanswered due to time limitation, staff will make sure these are answered and posted on the CDS website under the Member Center navigation bar. With that, welcome Heather Nash to start tonight's program.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Good evening to all of you, our CDS members, and for joining us on this very important member town hall meeting to discuss the initiative of revising the CDS bylaws. For those that do not know me, my name is Heather Nash. It has been an honor and privilege to serve as your CEO of the Chicago Dental Society over the past 16 months. It has been my goal and objective to ensure that I am visible and out and about amongst our members to hear what is on your mind and serve all of our members' profession and how I can best serve the entire CDS organization. Before I continue, just a reminder that you can submit all comments, as Dr. Lewis mentioned, in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. There is also a Q&A feature, and you can submit questions in that area as well. We will excuse me, we will go through full presentation before we will start answering the questions to ensure that we deliver all of the information prepared for you, and then we will start our question at the end of the presentation. So next slide, Joanne. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce the 6 CDS leaders who were appointed and accepted to sit on the Bylaws Task Force. These members have devoted and dedicated well over 100+ hours to ensure the compliance, history, culture, and future of CDS is preserved within our bylaws. Our chair is Dr. Mike Durbin, who served as the 2023 past president of CDS. We have Dr. Phil Shefke, who is the current CDS board secretary. Dr. Susan Becker-Doroshow, who served as our 2015 CDS past president. Dr. David Rosenbaum, who is our current CDS board of director. Dr. Cheryl Watson-Lowry, our 2019 CDS past president. And Dr. Spencer Pope, who is an immediate past CDS board member serving at the conclusion of 2023. Next slide, Joanne. In any new initiative...
Heather, I don't think I see the slides up.
Does everybody see the slides up, Dr. Durbin?
Oh,
okay.
Apologies, just me.
So in any new initiative, understanding the why behind the intent and actions assist in educating and understanding the methodology and outcomes. As a new executive staff leader taking the helm and leading this society, it is my duty to ensure that the foundation and structure of the organization is solid, in compliance, and poised for the future. That due diligence is often done first by a review of the bylaws, policy, and procedures, and also by engaging legal counsel. Kimberly Pendo was retained by CDS to do a thorough review of our bylaws in the summer and fall of 2023. During that review period, there were 3 initial areas that were requested for her attention. Number 1 was compliance. Number 2 was risk management. And number 3 was any other modernization needed to advance the mission and vision of the Chicago Dental Society. Simultaneous to that review, I recognized at that time there was a potential for risk and liability in our past election cycle. This really was an opportunity for me to go back to Kimberly and request for her to also focus on the additional review of the CDS election process. As the board of directors continues to address and advance the CDS strategic plan, it is important to note that we are faced with oftentimes stagnant or declining membership, and we must continue to drive member engagement with students, new and early career dentists with an increased member value proposition. The board has been laser focused on opening new and alternative pathways to leadership and committee appointments while understanding that deep-rooted history of CDS tradition and the leadership development groups. The time is now to create that pathway for the future and continue to be the respected leader in dental continuing education. The board took action and approved the motion to create a bylaws task force that is identified on the screen in December of 2023. And that task force was approved to ensure that CDS is protected and that we are representing all of our 4,200 members in advancing organized dentistry. There have been many board members, past presidents, and volunteers who have shaped where we are today. And it's important to note that many of them are on this town hall today and have been very careful in reaching out and consideration of questions, and we want to make sure that those questions are answered tonight. Kimberly Pendo, our CDS legal counsel, will share with you the recommendations coming from the first review of the bylaws, which she conducted, which first and foremost was a complete restatement and amended set of bylaws based on the changes that were needed. I know there were a few members who requested a red line copy of those bylaws, but that was simply inadvisable by Kimberly, and she can speak to why the restatement amended was suggested to the board. Kimberly, I'm going to pass it along to you to walk through within the first review those recommendations that are really legal and really recommendations coming from you.
Sure. Thank you, Heather. Hi, everyone. We can go on to the next slide. You know, as we started out this process, as Heather kind of gave everyone an overview, you know, first we were looking at particular provisions of the bylaws, but upon my review, which I would always do, is review them holistically in combination with talking to members of the task force and talking to your leadership and talking to your board and talking to Heather and getting a deeper understanding of how the organization truly operates and functions and what its practices have been. It became evident to me, looking at all those things together, that your bylaws really needed to be completely amended and restated for a number of reasons. It looks like over the years, there was sort of a patchwork of amendments that was placed at various places within the document. So it made them a little bit difficult to read and to follow. Your current bylaws really no longer reflect what's considered best practices for corporate governance for not-for-profit organizations. There were areas that were not in compliance with the Illinois Not-for-Profit Act. So those of you who may not know, the society is an Illinois not-for-profit corporation, which means that it was formed under the laws of the state of Illinois. And accordingly, it's that act, that statute, the Illinois General Not-for-Profit Corporation Act, that controls a lot of the way that the organization is governed and what needs to be in its bylaws and what can't be in its bylaws, and it really lays the groundwork. So first and foremost, you need to be in compliance with the law, as reflected by the Illinois Not-for-Profit Act and your Articles of Incorporation. So looking through the bylaws, there were some areas that were out of compliance with the act. And I think a particular issue that was concerning was your election process. Your current election process not only opens you up for certain legal liability, as Heather indicated, but it also, you are not complying with your own bylaws. So the process that you've been following is not the process that's outlined in your bylaws. You know, that's concerning as well, and opens the organization up for risk. And so, you know, looking at all of these things together and holistically, I recommended to the board very strongly that we needed to sort of start over. Not completely over. We were absolutely guided by how you are currently governed, as well as, you know, recommendations to adopt best practices for not-for-profit corporations, as well as the input of the board of directors and the task force members. And so it's been an iterative process, and with lots of communication and input along the way. To make really these new amended and restated bylaws a really strong document that positions you hopefully for the future, reflects best governance practices for elections and nominations, you know, trying to really move towards a competency-based board, with the involvement and role of your nominating committee under the new bylaws. And so these are all of the things that we considered and took into account when coming up with this new set of bylaws. So kind of going to our next slide, you know, these are all the things that I've already talked about. You know, there are some things in your current bylaws that really don't belong in bylaws. They belong in policies and procedures. We always want to keep your bylaws sort of lean and mean as possible, and take out policy, take out procedures from the bylaws, because, you know, we need to have the flexibility to make sure that those policies and procedures reflect the modern organization, or the organization, how it's actually working today. And so that's why we take that out of the bylaws, so we can really, you know, add as much to those policies and procedures as we need to, and be able to have the flexibility to do that. And so while there are some changes that have been implemented in our bylaws, there are some things that are going to be further explained, further controlled in our policies, that are going to be adopted by the board and obviously rolled out to the membership. Our branch directors, you know, currently they will continue to serve on the board, are elected geographically by the branch, as Heather already kind of mentioned, except for our new dentist director position that we're clearly establishing on the board, that is appointed by the board. Heather, I think you're muted, but if there's anything else you wanted me to add.
Yeah, there's just, I think in that first bullet point, if you could go back on the slide, Joanne, just, I think when we talk about modernization of the election process with the nominations committee, can you talk to that a little bit, just because you've got so much experience within associations, and why that recommendation?
Sure. So, you know, there's anytime we're looking at an elections process and who's going to be serving on our board and who's going to be in the leadership of the organization, there's a lot of factors that need to be considered, right? We need to consider the needs of the board. You know, what roles are we lacking, or what skill sets maybe that perhaps the board is lacking. And that's why it's important to have a nominating committee that's reviewing and vetting and coming up with a slate of candidates that's not only qualified, meets our qualifications that we've established in our bylaws, that also meets the needs of the organization. So that's part of the reason, is to really, it's considered a best governance practice to have, that competence, more of a competency-based board, that has the skills that we need to lead the organization, and that's vetted in a thoughtful way. And as secondary to that, or in addition to that, I shouldn't say secondary, we need to assure that in our nominations process, in our election process, we're not only following our governance procedures, we're following applicable law, we're not discriminating in any way, that there are not actions that live outside of the control of the organization that could impact and create liability for the organization. And so, that's why it's important and considered to be a best practice to have that nominating committee to do that work, to vet, applications, to vet candidates that are eager to run for our board. And it's also a more inclusive process, especially as there's especially in organizations that have been around a long time. Sometimes we see that the board or the process to get on the board becomes exclusive instead of inclusive. And I think that's, a pain point for sometimes for organizations that are looking to grow and embrace their new membership, and making sure that we have, an active nominating committee is a way to make our board more inclusive, more diverse, more representative of our membership.
And then Kimberly, lastly, just, and I think you stressed this to the board when you presented to them, the importance of the board approval of the elections and the board involvement of the elections.
Yeah, so when we're looking at our slate of candidates, so we have under the proposed draft, we have our nominating committee doing the work to put together a recommended slate of candidates. Then that slate of candidates goes to the board for review and ultimately approval. And it's important to have that step because for a number of reasons. First of all, there may be information on a candidate that the nominating committee is not privy to. Let's say if that candidate's not in good standing, if there's a disciplinary action, that involves the candidate, we need to have the ability to identify that before that person goes forward. And number two, hopefully if there was an issue, we could have an iterative process and a discussion if there was a competency that the board felt, that it was lacking and that perhaps one of the candidates proposed by the nominating committee didn't fill.
Okay. So I think Dr. Durbin, anything else that you'd like Kimberly to touch on before we hand it off to you for kind of some of those high level?
Yeah, I think that's fine for now. I'm sure there'll be some questions that come up where we'll bring Kimberly back in for her expertise.
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to hand it off to you, Dr. Durbin.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
Nope, I think you got to go back.
We already got the next slide. Sorry, we'll go back one more. Sorry. Okay, thanks. So I think Heather and Kimberly have done an excellent job of explaining the why we started looking at this process, why we made the decisions that we did in revising the bylaws. And what I'd like to do now is to highlight 3 areas that I think are significantly different from what we've done in the past and maybe were the cause for many of the questions that people had. And those 3 areas are the composition and role of the nominating committee, the way that branch directors are elected, as well as officer ladder automatic succession. So I'll go in that order. So the first thing is that when we, as Kimberly pointed out, when we look at our election process, we did have an election at the annual meeting in November, which again, we're going to do next month or in a couple months, I guess. And that election was held to elect the officers of the CDS. There was no election to elect the ISDS trustees, as is dictated by the ISDS bylaws. There was no election to elect the ADA delegates. which again is stipulated by the ISDS bylaws. And so when we looked at that whole big picture, we said the best way to do this and best practice and compliance would be to have a nominating committee. The task force spent several hours discussing the composition of the nominating committee. The composition that you see now of the two most immediate past presidents, the current president, the current secretary as an ex officio member, and 4 at-large members, one of which needs to be under the age of 40, was debated, discussed, torn apart, built up over several hours. The idea behind it was that by having the two most immediate past presidents and the current president, that representation from the 3 leadership development groups would be automatically there on the nominating committee. We chose not to stipulate that members of the leadership development group would be on the nominations committee because we were trying to build a document that would last for a while. We don't know what the future of the leadership development groups is. We all know that attendance and enrollment in the groups is going down. But we also understand how important the groups have been in the past and still are to the CDS. So a way of building a nominating committee that would include representation from all the groups was to include the two most immediate past presidents as well as the current president. Those 4 at-large members will be selected by the executive committee and approved by the board. That's the way it has to be. The CDS nominating committee has to be under not the control of the board, but the board has to have a key role in selecting those members. And that's why you see the composition the way that it is. Now, in all likelihood, people who apply to be on the nominating committee probably will be members of the groups because those are the people who are most likely to be wanting to be involved and to understand the process and to understand the CDS. But at the same time, we didn't want to close the door completely to somebody outside of the groups who may want to participate in the process. So that's how we composed the group. The role of the group, as has been stated already by Kimberly, will be to vet those candidates that are submitted both for competency and also good standing. So we needed to make sure that if you were running for a CDS officer position, that you previously had been a CDS director, which is stipulated in our current policy. We need to make sure that you're paying your dues. We need to make sure that there's not some type of an unknown issue that we would want to know about before getting on the board. So that again is the role and the composition of the nominating committee. Obviously, as Kimberly stated, there are policies that are going to need to be developed by the CDS board in order to support these bylaws changes. The second area is the role of the CDS nominating committee and board in branch director elections. And I know this has been very confusing for people. So currently, the overwhelming majority of the board is selected geographically and sent to the board by the individual branches, with the board having not necessarily control, but no role at all in that selection process. And so when we look at accountability, governance accountability, and legal accountability, we're seeing a shortfall in how we currently do things. So the idea here was that the branches will still be responsible for electing their branch director. That is not being taken away from the branch. Currently, the bylaws and the bylaws for the branches state that the branches will select their own directors. That will continue. The change is that now candidates for the director position will submit their names to the nominating committee of the CDS, again, to make sure that they're competent and to make sure that they're members in good standing. If 2 or 3 people apply and 2 or 3 people are good candidates, then the CDS nominating committee and board will send those candidates back to the branch to have an election. The CDS nominating committee will not be selecting those branch directors. The branch will be electing their director. Now, some people might say, what's the point? What's the point of the CDS board and the nominating committee even getting involved with the branch? Well, again, it ensures legal accountability on behalf of the CDS. And I know this one is a little bit tougher to kind of not necessarily swallow, but kind of understand what that role is. But I think if you were listening to how Kimberly was defining and describing best practice and compliance with the not-for-profit Act, you'll see that this is a necessary step for us. And then finally, as we currently know, each year the officers of the CDS are elected at the annual meeting of the CDS, which is typically at that November regional meeting. When we look at that process, and we saw the ISDS House of Delegates approve some language this year at the House to address this issue with their board, what we saw was that having an election each year for the officer put the CDS at risk in several ways. One was that the current secretary of the CDS is now the chair of the Dental Meetings Committee. Maybe certainly one of the most important, maybe the most important committee in the CDS. The Dental Meetings Committee is in charge now of planning the midwinter meeting and our other educational offerings. To think that somebody would serve for 2 years and be then taken off the board and someone stuck in their place without really knowing what kind of qualifications they might have seemed not to make any sense for us. So in order to avoid some of the issues that we've seen at recent coalition nights, and to also preserve the institutional knowledge of those board members as they are rising up the ladder, and to be in compliance with the Not-for-Profit Act, the recommendation is to have an automatic succession in the CDS officer ladder. We all know that currently the president-elect automatically ascends to the president, but this will now mean that the officer elected will be the treasurer. The other officers will ascend through an automatic succession. I'll also point out that for those of you who read the bylaws closely and wondered what the heck was going on with the vacancy language that's there, that language is word for word from the current bylaws and was there in order to preserve the rotation that the groups currently have. So again, that was something that the group talked about, even the board talked about, in terms of saying, do we want to change the way that the vacancies are taken care of? Well, we felt that for our purposes now, and with the leadership development group still being involved, that it made sense to continue with the vacancy succession that we have. So that gives you some input on those 3 major changes that we're seeing to the bylaws. The overwhelming majority of the bylaws that you're seeing in front of you are going to be minor changes, but these 3 are significant compared to what we have done in the past. And next slide. Okay, so what about the leadership development groups? There is no intent to eliminate the leadership development groups. The leadership development groups foster camaraderie and an opportunity to gain a more in-depth understanding of the issues at the national, state, and local level. And we see that in our meetings. We know that in the past, many of our leadership development group meetings were CE meetings. One year, I remember we had a radio show, like an old time radio show as our leadership development group meeting. And I think all the groups now have shifted to a better use of their time, which is really to have an in-depth discussion of those issues at the national and state and local level with those members who are most involved, and in many cases, the ones who are in the critical positions on councils or on boards for ISDS or CDS or even the ADA. And also, the leadership development groups cultivate and mentor leaders to serve at all levels of the ADA tripartite. And we don't expect that to change at all moving forward. When we're looking at nominees that may be interested in positions at the higher levels in both the CDS and the ISDS, that is probably going to be people who are involved with the leadership development groups. So while opening pathways in areas is good and important, we also want to make sure that we're preserving the culture and the history that we have with the leadership development groups. So as we do that, the CDS board is in the process or will be in the process once the bylaws changes are approved in whatever form they are, in defining the future role of those LDGs. And that will be in policy, not in bylaws. As we all know, right now, there is no mention of the groups, the intergroup council, in the bylaws or the policy manual, and that has put the CDS, as Kimberly and Heather pointed out, at great risk. And so we want to make sure that we have a process that's defined. We want to make sure a process that is accessible and reproducible as we move forward. We all know about insurance, right? The board has D&O insurance, so you can buy insurance. But another way you can have insurance is making sure that your policies and bylaws are clear and concise and address the issues that are important to the society, and making sure that nothing is really left to be to another group or an outside entity or somebody that is not defined in the CDS bylaws or policy. And next slide. Okay. Did you want me to hit on this, Heather, or?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? We've got a couple questions, so why don't you hit that and then we can maybe dive into the questions.
Perfect. So just some next steps. We all know that the regional meetings are now November 8th. The intent is that these bylaws, revised bylaws, restated and amended bylaws that you see in front of you, which have been approved by the CDS board, presented and approved by the CDS board, will go to a member vote at the November 8th regional meeting. There will be, as has been stated several times tonight, policy changes that will need to be made in order to reflect the changes that are coming from the approval of these bylaws. And this process will be a phased integration, which means that the 2025 coalition night will proceed as scheduled. There is no way that we're going to be able to get this approved and do everything we need to do in terms of nominating committees and vetting and timelines and such in that short a period. We may not be able to get all of it ready by the 2026 coalition night. That's what what the CDS board is going to have to look at and make sure it does what's best for the CDS. So in some areas, we may be able to do things easier. So for instance, ADA delegation, you really need to have that set by May or so. So whether or not we'll be able to do that for 25 or will that start in 26, we'll see. But again, what's important to remember is that the ISDS bylaws stipulate elections take place at CDS. That's not occurring. Mm-hmm. And that the nominating process for many of these positions is occurring outside of the CDS without any mention of the groups that are doing that. So that's, again, where we're at this point.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Dr. Durbin. At this time, I want to encourage, we've got a couple good questions, and I think we've made it through the initial presentation. There's some good questions that will address some additional points that I know that task force and the board certainly have discussed. And I'm going to try to go through them clearly, but the first question, I'm going to read this because this is being recorded, so I want to make sure I read it. The first question was, can someone clarify what the role of the leadership groups will now be? Is there some type of affiliation to the nominating committee? Which, Dr. Durbin, I believe you addressed in your presentation. So
Yeah, I think this popped up before he talked about it.
okay, so I believe we've answered that question. If we haven't, please submit any further action you'd like us to answer on the leadership groups. The second question, I think I'm gonna pose it to Dr. Durbin first. There, in quotes, unknown issue is too subjective. My worry would be that one could be denied to move up the ladder due to different practice modality, example, belonging to a DSO, or involvement with an entity like an insurance company. Will there be disclosure as to why candidates are not chosen by the board? Or I'm assuming vetted by the nominating committee, because they would have to be vetted by the nominating committee first.
Yeah, I think I'll grab this one unless you object, Dr. Durbin. You can add on, and I'm going to sort of combine it with the next question, which was, to me, if a candidate is in good standing, has paid their dues and participated, bias could be involved for not being approved by the board. What can we put in our bylaws to avoid this? These are sort of the same questions, and so I think that's why there is a nominating committee comprised of all these different individuals, plus the board reviewing the nominating committee's work. Those are your safeguards. This is a defined group of people charged with the responsibility to objectively review and vet candidates. They might have interviews with the candidates. They're going to look at different things when selecting and putting together that slate. We're not just putting that process outside without any controls. It's a very thoughtful process. There's a lot of people involved. And you're going to have to trust, the members that are on that nominating committee and on the board of directors. They have legal and fiduciary duties and obligations to do what's in the best interest of the organization and to abide by the law. And that's what they're going to be charged with doing, and that's how they're going to conduct themselves. Or there's going to be somebody on one of those, either on the nominating committee or the board that's going to take them to task, or staff as well is involved in the process. So there's a lot of safeguards built into this, much more than you have today. And why we're putting this into place, that it is the people with the legal obligations to abide by the law, to abide by our policies, to meet their fiduciary duties, that are doing this work. To answer the question, will the nominating committee give reasons or why a candidate is not selected? Not likely, unless it's an issue maybe of experience, or it's a coachable moment or a mentoring moment. Typically, we do not get involved in that because we don't want to create unnecessarily room for misstating something or misrepresenting, or sometimes it's just like in a job interview, right? We felt that someone's qualifications put them above another candidate.
And if I could add to that for one sec, I think something that Kimberly said, trust, fiduciary duty to do what's best for the society. I looked at the list of the people who signed up for this webinar. I know almost all of you on that list, and almost all of you have served as a CDS director or an ISDS trustee. And I hope you would agree that when you served, that you were serving in the best interest of that entity that you were serving, and that those around you did as well. I understand fear. I get it. This is different than what we have done before. But I can also tell you the system we have right now is even more arbitrary it's too arbitrary. And so it was even more an issue of a very small group of people being able to control those elections. And I know people are saying, well, the board is small, the nominating committee is small. Yeah, I guess, but they're held to a standard. They're held to a legal standard. The groups are not. And the choices that were made by some of the groups along the way, in the way voting was done, was not in the best interest of the CDS, and in fact put the CDS at risk. And that's part of the reason why we're having this discussion tonight. So again, I can't stress enough that there has to be trust here, and there has to be an acknowledgement that these board members and these nominating committee members and the staff that supports them are going to do what's best for the CDS. The question of types of modalities or where you work and such, yeah, we know we're going to get employee docs. We know we're going to get OSO and DSO docs. We know we're going to get faculty and who all apply. And we just have to make sure that those pathways are clear and open and understandable to everybody. Now, in terms of the question of, will you be telling people why they didn't make it? I will tell you that the American Association of Orthodontists now has a trustee at large. We had 26 applicants for the trustee at large position last year. Every single one of them probably would have been an excellent trustee. The task force for the trustee selection narrowed it down. The board interviewed those people, those selections were made, and we did let the other ones know that they did not make it, but we didn't necessarily give them details on why. Now, obviously, if somebody reached out to you and said, hey, what could I have done different? Maybe you could give some examples. But I don't think you're going to see the board coming back and saying, oh, by the way, you didn't get it because X, Y, or Z. Unless, as Kimberly pointed out, it was a teachable moment. Maybe somebody who didn't have experience that you'd say, hey, you know, maybe you want to try to get involved here, or maybe you'd like to get involved there. And so I think that's something we'll see as we move forward.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kimberly.
So there's been some questions about how do we go about, how do candidates submit, their interest, or can you run from the floor? And so, yes, so we're not running from the floor. The process will be the nominating committee will solicit interest from the membership. And if you're interested in running or being a candidate, you will submit an application, for review by the nominating committee. So it's more of an open process. And it will be an active process, actively seeking interest from the voting members to serve. And that will be built into the timeline, as Dr. Durbin kind of alluded to, on what the election process is going to look like.
And if I could I'm just going to add on to that. And that's a really important point, because I think it bleeds into the question. There's kind of a threefold question, but I think this question is really important because I think the board I think I mentioned it in the beginning, the board has been laser focused on how we continue to open the pathways for leaders within CDS. CDS, we have 4,200 members. And we realize and recognize that member engagement, and most oftentimes when we're looking for applicants and we're trying to open the pathway of committees and joining committees, I think by instituting the nominating committee, it does open a call for candidates. And so, some of I think the more traditional opportunities to submit candidates can still exist through policy. But we want to make sure, and it's always been called, run from the floor. Now it's really a call for candidates, and we're seeking, as Kimberly said, we're seeking candidates that want to put their name forward, that may or may, reside outside of the leadership groups. And so that's important as we look at the criteria. And again, I think Dr. Durbin mentioned this. This is what we also need to make sure that we address in policy. And so I think that is the intent. Kimberly, I think it bleeds into this next question. I think it was good to answer that one first. There's one that to ask legal counsel, is it a conflict of interest to have the board of directors select the 4 at-large members who will then select the nominee for officer position?
No, absolutely not. They're actually, you want the board to be involved in this process. Again, the board is serving, they know what the board is looking for, they know what the board needs. And so it's not. And the process, I know this is kind of tied in, how will those at-large nominating committee members be selected? What does that process look like? That's something that the board's going to be working on in the policy about what that process looks like.
And I think we did answer, I'll repeat it. How will you call for applications from the nominating committee at-large member or at-large positions? And I'll just note, CDS has started to institute that this year. So many of you, and hopefully all of you on the call tonight, has seen how we have opened up the process for call for applications. We have done it with the communications committee. We have done it with our new diversity and inclusion committee. We now have a new dentist committee that we've now opened that pathway up for a call for applications. We find that I believe in looking for a nominating committee, it will be no different. So I think we've been successful in really opening that pathway up. So I would say that, for those 4 at-large members, it would go through a call for applications. And then the third was, will CDS have an open call for nominations from the membership for the treasurer position? And
Yes,
I think
and
we've
that's
kind of
what we
addressed
just-
that
yeah.
twofold.
Yeah, that's what we just talked about. The nominating committee will be soliciting interest for candidates from the voting membership. And that's, in the bylaws, in the proposed bylaws, when you look under the definition in our committee and task force section, Article 10, Section 1B, nominating committee, where we talk about the responsibilities of the nominating committee.
And Dr. Durbin, do you want to add on to that?
Sorry, one more time. I was looking at.
Will CDS have an open call for nominations from the membership for the treasurer position? So Kimberly just addressed where it states it in the bylaws, but do you want to add in, how that is somewhat, how that it will be addressed in policy as well?
Yes, so I think, as we had mentioned before, the CDS has to have elections for several of these positions. ISDS trustee, the ISDS bylaws state that the CDS has to have, has a district, the district shall conduct this election. Well, we don't currently do that. So we are going to have to work out the policy for each of these types of positions, whether it's ISDS trustee, ADA delegation, or the CDS treasurer. And so that is yet to be worked through.
Okay, I'm going to keep on moving through this. We've got a 3-part question on Article 411.
I think they're comments more than questions.
Yeah, it's, under Article 4, quorum and manner of acting, 50 voting members in good standing present and in person seems to be quite a low number in a society of over 4,000 members. Can someone explain the thinking here?
Well, unfortunately, you don't have great member turnout for voting. And so we can't be hand-tied, by people not submitting their votes. It's not only for meetings, we take electronic voting also. And it just kind of reflects the reality today. I think the membership is most engaged by, giving the board the authority, has the authority and responsibility to run the organization. And we see low voting from our membership, and we need to be able to take action. So it's not, you have to pick a number.
Okay. I'll take this next question. It was under Article 11, the finance. In what fashion will the report of the financial condition of the society be made to the membership of the society annually, and what will this report be required to include? Right now, the finance committee undergoes an annual audit with our auditor. We do submit that to the board for approval. We don't do an annual report, and that is typically in associations. There are associations that do an annual report. We do not. But we do have a 990 that is available at any point for any member to see. That's online.
Yeah, that's the 990 is your tax return. So
Yeah.
unlike individuals, our tax return, the organization's tax return is a public document, readily available. It can be sent to you. You can go online, look at it from the IRS website, or there's also other organizations that make those public information. So the finances are an open book, if you will.
Thank you.
So Kimberly, I'm seeing several questions again about this open election idea. And I think if we're really talking about what we're talking about is for the CDS officer. And so we're getting questions, someone's vetted, but not selected, why can't they run from the floor? How does someone run from the floor if they'd like to run from the floor? If you could review that one more time, and I think that would be helpful for everybody.
Sure. So, I mean, I think there's two different tracks to this question. I mean, so the way, and instead of running from the floor, I think we're proposing a more open process by opening up the solicitation of candidates by the nominating committee. But there is not a way to run from the floor if you are not selected to be placed on the slate based on the review and the work of the nominating committee. And that is, again, to make sure that we have the strongest candidates, that we are building a competency-based board, and that we have the people on the board that reflect, the individuals with the skill sets that the board needs. And so if you're interested in running on the board, anyone and everyone could submit their application to the nominating committee, and it will be reviewed and considered for inclusion on the slate. But in the proposed amended and restated bylaws, outside of that process, you cannot run for the board or for that open board position, officer position, or
and then Kimberly, looks like there's a compliance or not-for-profit act question here about previously removal of directors or officers was a 75% threshold. Now it's a 66% vote. If you might comment on that.
Yeah, under the Illinois Not-for-Profit Act, in order to remove an officer, it takes a 2/3 vote. It takes a 2/3 vote. Sorry. So we adopted proposed language that mirrors the Illinois Not-for-Profit Act.
Okay. There was a question, and I think Dr. Durbin, you can answer this. Why wasn't there a new dentist sitting on the task force? We are trying to get younger dentists more involved. This is the future of our organization. We're new dentists asked our thoughts. I can start this question and maybe defer it to you. Currently, we do have a new dentist director sitting on our board, Dr. Sara Imtiaz, and she was absolutely consulted on whether she would feel comfortable sitting on this task force. And she did provide her thoughts on serving. And Dr. Durbin, maybe this is where I'll hand it to you on the discussion that ensued.
Yeah, so hi, Jackie. Nicer day today than yesterday. Sorry, right? So, we did discuss this and Dave Lewis, the president of CDS, who was in charge of selecting the task force, obviously looked at this, and the board looked at this as well in their discussions. And I'm just going to speak very frankly here. I think that given the level of detail that was going into this, we wanted to get input, but at the same time, we understood that we really had to get down to the foundation. I don't think that there was anything that we missed in there in terms of the younger dentists having, input. And I think where you will definitely see more input will be in the policies that are made to support these bylaws changes. And I think that will be the time where we'll definitely want to get some more input and such. But in looking at the composition, again, you're looking at equal representation between the three groups. You're looking at a group of, officers, past trustees of ISDS who have that institutional knowledge of these entities to say, okay, that was the past. How do we want to make sure that building for the future, we have more opportunities for people? And that's why we chose to build the task force the way it was, and the input that I gave Dave and the board gave Dave as he was building it. And I think that, again, as we look more at the policies, I think that's going to be the opportunity, the time for opportunity for more input on, hey, how does that work to become an ADA delegate? Or, hey, how does that work to become an ISDS trustee? And so I think we're going to see that as we move forward.
And just to add on, I mean, I would say that the task force has given updates to the board along the way over the last 8 months, up to the last meeting in August. And I will say Dr. Sar Imtiaz has done an excellent, stellar job in representing the new dentist directors out there. So she is absolutely a vocal, participatory member of the board. And so we have used her as such. So in that review of the task force, bringing that back to the board, there has been that opportunity to have that new dentist director voice. I'm going to keep on going down these questions. Follow up to Kimberly's comment, with the nominating committee made up of board members, and if the 4 at-large members are selected by the board, then how can that be fair? I do not see how this is a safeguard.
I think that's a comment, not a question.
Okay.
Yeah, there's 4
Um,
large members there. We don't control them just because they were appointed by the board. You know, they have responsibilities. We've got the past presidents on as well. We're no longer on the board.
And so I think that lends into, there's a question further down, how are the at-large members selected? There will be an open call for applicants to be on the nominating committee. And so I think it is defined under the composition of the nominating committee, but it will be open for people to apply. So to Dr. Durbin's point with AAO, 26 applicants, I hope we get just as many. We will select 4, but and including a new dentist director. So in total there, I think many opportunities for anybody to apply for that. And I think I gave the example that we've already started to institute that this year at CDS, which is, I think, a big step forward.
So Heather, could I answer a couple of these?
Please,
and then
please.
I'd like to have Kimberly answer 2 others.
Okay.
So there is a question about new dentists and under 40 and gray. Why not simply state a new dentist? And I think we chose under 40 because that's the definition that CDS uses for their new dentist director. That's the language that we currently have in our policy for that position. And it becomes difficult to say what's, a new dentist, right? You could be a new dentist who's 60, who just got out of school. I get that. The intent was to have a younger and new dentist, I suppose. So that was the answer there. There was a question, branch directors are selected and approved, selected by the board. The branch does not select the director directly. Yes, we already mentioned that when I spoke before. The branch will be electing their director. The candidates for branch director will submit their names to the CDS nominating committee to vet them, to make sure that that they're members in good standing and are competent, but also to give that legal accountability that we had talked about for the CDS. So the branches will continue to elect their directors. So hopefully that answers that. Now going up, couple questions here, I think somewhat related. So if the nominating committee selects the only candidate, why have an election? And in addition, this smacks of an old boys club provision. If the nominating committee doesn't support someone, they can silence the candidate. This could get CDS sued. I'm wondering if you might be able to address those.
So there could be a contested election. that remains to be seen. If the nominating committee decides that it's going to put forth more than one candidate, it could do that. So that's kind of the answer to that question. But moreover, it's still, it's still part of the process to have the election. This is an old boys club. Actually, I think it's been shown through a lot of research into best governance practices that a nominating committee such as this actually does not continue the old boys club. It's not a self-elected or board. It is a process that's much more open, and I think the research shows that this is moving to a competency-based board that's vetted by a nominating committee, and an open process leads to better governance and more diversity on boards.
And if I could just add on here, and this is just speaking from an executive staff and what my duty is. And, I know we talked about it earlier, but I think it's important to bring it up now as I start to see some of the questions come in and some of the underlying distrust. And I'm going to be really frank. What I'm reading in some of these questions is a lot of distrust. And that is what we're trying to face and to address head on. And the safeguards that are in place are you have 14 board members and you have, an additional 7 that sit on a nominating committee. And if you say that you don't trust, 25 of your members to do the due diligence that they've been elected and appointed to do, then that's a bigger question. But I think we have to understand when you've got the number and the level of people and the people on this call, because as Dr. Durbin said, everybody that's on this call, the list who is registered, you are all leaders, you're past presidents, you've been past board members, you've been past ISDS trustees. You know the responsibility that it takes, but you're not one alone. And so what I would say as an executive staff person and somebody who is responsible for this, the reason we have engaged legal counsel and that we have undergone this review is to address just this. But if we don't set the path forward with a trusting organization, then we will just continue to have this. And that is what we're trying to eliminate. Openness, open pathways. We need to set the course for our students, our new dentists, our early career dentists. We all know the direction we need to head. But we also know that we have to protect CDS and set us up and advance us into the future. So I hope that what I'm seeing on some of these questions and some of the distrust that I'm hearing is just making sure that we're taking care and doing the due diligence, which I believe we have. I will tell you, those 6 members that have sat on this task force, along with the board, they have taken this extremely seriously, as have I. And I really hope just to let you all know how much care has been put into this. And again, there does need to be trust, but these are your members. These are your fellow peers and your fellow colleagues who you're charging this with. And they're the ones who are stepping up for candidacy. And they want to be elected onto the board and they want to do the good due diligence for the organization. So I felt it compelled to say that because I just am reading distrust, and I really hope we can get past that as an organization.
And I see the question here about ascending the CDS ladder. As I mentioned before, we know that CDS officer, or the CDS is tasked with electing the CDS officer, the ISDS trustee, and the ADA delegation. And the current bylaws address that nominating committee, but at the same time, the bylaws don't have all the detail. So the foundation comes in the bylaws. The operational side of it will come in the policy, and that will be become clear as the board debates and develops these policies.
And then Dr. Durbin, I think I'm going to pass this along. The question on how do you describe competent? A branch may want unique or someone willing to change the direction of the branch. And I think this may allude to a few other questions with regards to when you're in good standing, what are the criteria to run for officer? And as we continue to develop and formalize that in policy.
Yeah, so, again, I can't stress enough that this idea of the nominating committee vetting these branch director appointments or these branch directors that are being submitted is simply to give us some legal accountability. It is not to take away the right of the branch to elect the director that they feel best represents them. And as Kimberly had mentioned, and I think I mentioned before too, there could be multiple people from the branch who submit their names. And we just want to make sure that, again, there's not something underlying there that the branch wouldn't know about, that CDS could know about, to say yes. And again, from that kind of legal duty, I guess, it gives the CDS some opportunity to at least say, yes, we had a role in the selection of our board. But it's still the branch that elects. It is still the branch that removes a director. The CDS board cannot remove a director. Only the branch can remove a director. The CDS board can remove an officer with a 2/3 vote at the meeting, at a meeting of the board. But again, we're not taking away the autonomy of the branch. The branch is still going to be autonomous in terms of putting forth or letting those people run who would like to run, and then electing who they think is the best.
There is a question, will the branch presidents and directors be bonded for insurance protection? And currently our branches do reside under our insurance policy, the branch presidents and directors. I think we did that. I think I'm not seeing any new questions, but I want to make sure we've hit all of them.
There's probably not a bond, just so that is, your insurance your insurance covers them, but there's not a bond.
Not a bond, but they're under our policy. Our branches are.
Right.
New Dennis is one of the nominating committees.
I think we hit them.
There was one that was there that got removed, but that's okay. I think maybe it must have got answered.
What happens to, and I think we have not hit this, what happens to the intergroup council and the intergroup agreement? And this is that outside entity that Kimberly, you addressed in currently resides outside of our bylaws and policy.
Yeah, that agreement is completely outside of the organization. There's a lot of I think misconceptions about that agreement. But that's completely outside of CDS and our processes and our procedures. And so what we are doing is making sure that we are taking control of our election process, and that it all resides within the organization. And so I think, our nominating committee is reflecting that, and then the policies that the board will develop will further refine the election process.
And having said that, there may be elements of that agreement that may go into policy. That'll be up to the board to decide.
I think there was a question if the board is focused on member value and focused on new dentist involvement, was there any consideration specifically qualifying a new dentist as one of the nominating committee members at large?
That's the one
certainly
I answered. I think I answered that one.
Oh,
Yeah.
you did? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I'm just
Heather,
making
maybe you
sure that
wanna
we
do
had
it.
all the questions.
I'll let Heather address this one. How, I thought you addressed this very well a moment ago, but I'll put it back to you. How do you ensure that the nominating committee does not discriminate against anyone?
Well, it goes back to the safeguards and the trust that is there. This is an open pathway, a call. And you've got 7 people that sit on that nominating committee, and you've got an additional, 14 board members. You've got 25 of your members that are representing CDS that have been elected and that have been appointed to do due diligence, duty of care, have fiduciary duty for the organization. And there's got to be trust there that they are doing the job. And if there is somebody who isn't, you've got 24 other people to call on them and to hold them accountable. So that's the importance of making sure that we have competent board members and we have competent committee members so that that doesn't exist. And that's exactly why we're going through this process, is that we want this to be open, transparent, honest, fair.
And Kimberly, I'm going to have you address the legal side of that, because currently the system that we have, there is no way to prevent that. But
No.
maybe you can comment about a board being discriminatory and the ramifications of that.
Yeah, I mean, right now, again, this process resides completely outside of the organization. And which means a number of things. It has the potential to create liability for the organization and how that process works. Because we have no input or control and there is no oversight. There's no staff, there's no checks and balances. And number 2, there's a lot of potential liability for the individuals that are involved in that process outside of the organization. There is no insurance coverage for you. If you're a bad actor, there's no insurance coverage anyway, by the way, if you discriminate against somebody, or libel somebody or slander somebody, or, whatever the various claims can be involved, in a process like that. There's absolutely no protection for you or coverage. And it creates, unacceptable liability for the organization.
And just want to thank, I know there's some comments being placed in the Q&A, and I think I want to thank everybody for doing that. I think it's important to read these comments and make sure that these are, these are addressed, and so this doesn't happen. And that's exactly why we're going through this, just to hit it on it. What has happened in the past, if there have been wrongs in the past, at some point we have to write it, and that's what we're doing right now. Now is the time. So that is why we're going through this very detailed and meaningful and thoughtful process, is so that that never happens again.
And appreciate you sharing that, and certainly,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all of us who are in leadership are sorry to hear that, because that obviously is not what we stand for and what we're looking to do. And going through this process, as Heather has mentioned, is hopefully moving us down a road where that will be less likely to occur.
Absolutely. I don't see any, I think we've addressed all the questions. I don't see any new questions. I'm gonna just ask, so I think there's one guest that said, let me just read this really quick, this method. Certainly, I mean, I think the reason, so to address this question, there's a question of why this method did not allow for back and forth discussion. I would suspect past president sent a 3-page letter with questions, and most aren't getting answered or allowing us to debate. what is said by speakers. So there's one document that we've received. The entire board has received that. They have been sent a 3-page document. Our attorney has a copy of it, and our task force has a copy of it. I can assure you all of those questions have been received and read. Dr. Durbin, do you feel that those questions that were in that document have been answered? Do you want to address any of those additional questions that I believe this guest is referring to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there were some questions in terms of timing of calling a special meeting. Currently, the bylaws, I believe, say 15 days. We expanded that out. But we did have a minimum of only 5 days just because of, COVID being a perfect example. We might have needed to have a meeting sooner rather than later. We understand that, people would like to, be in attendance and be able to get out of the office and things like that. But that's part of the reason we expanded it to greater than 15 days, because we didn't think the 15 days that was currently stipulated was enough. The questions about the open election, I think, have been addressed already. Again, I think as we see policies come forward from the board, some of that may become clearer. I know that there was some concern about including language about a limitation on donations made by the CDS that obviously the CDS board will look at. I'm not sure that you weren't sure if that belonged in bylaws.
No, you can't. That's a board decision.
Yeah, and so that may be a policy that we, that they may want to revisit or look at. And again, the other kind of issues that were brought up there, and I don't have the letter right in front of me, and I apologize for that. But we thought we were in our presentation, we were trying to address as many of those as we could proactively, other than those few that I just mentioned. And certainly, Heather and Kimberly can look at that again and see. I think it was felt that most of those fell under compliance with the Not-for-Profit Act that were issues, and that's why we had made those changes.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a few minutes here, and I have it in front of me. So I think Kimberly, you have it as well.
I think we've addressed all of them.
I believe we have.
It's not
for the purpose of the recording, I think Dr. Durbin just addressed having 2/3 of the voting members of the society. Article 4, Section 2, having 2/3 of the voting members of the society having to ask for a special meeting. I think you just addressed that.
I mean,
just the timing, not the 2/3.
Not the 2/3, yeah. I mean, that was obviously a meeting is extremely expensive. And so, it has to be a high bar. If there's another issue or need, I think you're going to have to trust that the board is going to reach out to the membership, because obviously it's, the members are critical to the health and well-being of the organization. And that's why everybody is here. So again, I think it goes back to a little bit to trust. But calling a special meeting of the members has the potential to have a huge financial impact on the organization, and it's not something that we can have happen too easily. I don't think in your entire history you've probably ever invoked that provision.
All right. Article 4, Section 3 was addressing this should not be less than 30 days. Members,
Dr. Durbin, yeah. This actually, this is statutory language, but we have flexibility. But again, we need the ability, if we have to act more quickly. We've got Zoom now and, different options available. Potentially, but I think, again, we want people to be there. And so obviously if we're going to go to the expense of having a meeting, we want people there. And unless it was, extraneous circumstances, it's not something that's actually going to happen.
Okay. I believe we've talked about open election, running what the nomenclature of running from the floor is. One, I don't believe that we've addressed is resignation or removal of a board officer. And how is 2/3 of the vote defined present for a meeting with a quorum present, with no quorum? So there was a request to have that maybe defined further.
I think the quorum and the manner of acting is defined in the bylaws.
I think it's defined elsewhere, not in that particular paragraph necessarily. but
Right. no,
Elsewhere
defined.
where it describes what a quorum is.
Yeah, and the manner of acting.
There was a comment on section 14, which was compensation. What other capacity could they serve in that would pay a compensation? I'm not sure I understood that question. We have compensation clearly defined in the bylaws for officers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe what they're referring to is if you hired outside of service, not in connection with service on the board, but if you hired a board member to do something.
I think they're referring, there is specific language there under the compensation, and maybe Kimberly, if you could go that part and read it, I think that's what they're referring to, the second part of that statement.
In the
The compensation.
Yeah, section 14.
Article 14 or what article? I'm sorry.
It doesn't have an exact, I believe the article that it's
Oh,
listed
sorry,
under-
so it's the board,
right,
we're talking about Article 5, Section 14.
right. On page 8.
Yeah, so that's what they're referring to. So if a board member was hired for any reason, not having anything to do with their board service, I don't know, to to take out the trash, I don't know, whatever the job might be or the service, that, they're not precluded from that, other than going through a whole conflict of interest analysis, making sure it was fair to the organization, etc. But there was nothing excluding them from being paid for services that were outside of board services.
I think we talked about auto succession. There was a comment made on, I think, Dr. Durbin, you've worked through the recommendation of auto succession and why that is important to CDS.
Yeah.
And then I think I've just gone through all the pages. There was a comment on CDS allowing to make a $10,000 a year contribution. This actually falls outside of the bylaws. This is under the purview of the finance committee and the board.
Yeah.
And right now we don't make charitable contributions. The charitable contributions that we have made in the past have been to the Mission of Mercy. But currently we don't make any charitable contributions outside of that. So I believe that covered, what that comment, but just as a reference, what we will do is, for that member that submitted those questions, we will provide the questions with all the answers to those questions, and we'll post that on the website under all of the questions that we've answered tonight, so that there's full transparency and everybody can read those questions. Dr. Durbin, did any other questions come in? Let's see.
I'm not seeing any.
No.
Okay. Let's see. So I do not see the question you were referring to. The questions that we were just addressing was a submitted document to our email address, to the board, to the task force, to me. And that's what we were addressing. So to those members those questions that we were just reviewing, we will make sure that those are all available to all members on the website for questions and answers. So that's why you did not see it. The question that you're referring to is because that was delivered by email to many of the board and task force members. Can you share the total number of questions shared? I'm only seeing 15. Again,
If you click at the top, there's a part that says open, answered, and dismissed. So that will show you the questions.
thank you, Dr. Durbin.
And I think most of the answered ones were related to getting on the call.
So what is next? I think we did talk about next steps. And maybe this is a good time for me. Obviously, we've had a lot of good discussion and questions asked here. We've spent the last 90 minutes trying to bring information, share the why behind, and really at a high level from not only our legal counsel, but also from the task force members and the board, really sharing with all of you. And we've had about 50 members. I think at the height, we had about 52 members join us this evening. So we've done the best that we can to share transparently what is, what the process has been. The next steps, as we alluded to on the slide deck, was there will be a vote at November 8th. The board, we will make sure that after this call, the board will convene to make sure that there's no further action they want to take. It's important that this input and feedback is heard. And that's why this town hall is so important, is that we need to seek input and feedback from all members. So I think the 50 people that joined us this evening, thank you. Thank you for asking great questions. We appreciate it. I know that we've had all our board members on, we have our task force members on, and we will be following back up with the board to ensure that the proposed bylaws move forward to the members for a vote. That vote will happen on November 8th. We are not a House of Delegates. The vote that will be, we obviously will be having our election, but we will be taking a vote. This isn't a House of Delegates of debating. It's a yes or a no vote. And so it's important for us to hear, if you're not satisfied with that, Dr. Durbin is the chair of the task force. I encourage you to reach out to him, reach out to me as the CEO, reach out to our board members. And if, again, there is not going to be debate on November 8th. It's a yes or a no vote. So that is the next steps. We will have, again, the board will convene to make sure that everything that we heard this evening has been addressed, and that they are confident with the proposed bylaws to move forward to the members for a vote. So we will continue to register November 8th. All voting members in good standing will be delivered a voting card at the November 8th meeting for that vote. If there's any other questions, please, again, on our website under the Member Center navigation, info@cds.org. Those questions go right to me. So every question that I get, I deliver to Dr. Durbin and Dr. Lewis, who then share with the task force and the board. So there is an avenue that we have in place that every question that comes in has been delivered. And I encourage you, all of you that are on the call, these people that sit on the task force. We've got past presidents, current and past board members. Board members, please reach out to them. And maybe in this instance, if you don't feel your question is being answered, a telephone call may be the better avenue, so that you have, the understanding that your questions have been heard and answered appropriately. And again, we are doing the due diligence of our organization to move us forward for the future. And this is not an easy task. This is, the American College of Dentistry went through this. We are not the only people. We've got ISDS has been updating their bylaws. ADA has updated their bylaws. This is good practice, and we have not done it for decades. So we're doing all the right things. But if you're not happy with what you're hearing, it's important for you to be heard. And again, great questions tonight, great dialogue from our panelists. Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Dr. Durbin, for all of your work and effort. We're now at just about 8:30. We've spent 90 minutes. So I just want to thank you, thank everybody for joining us. And again, continue to look at the website. We will post the recording there tomorrow morning. And we will make sure that all of the questions are dictated with answers, and that will be posted as well.
So I just wanted to clarify, because I saw just a comment, no questions were, the only questions that were dismissed were ones that were answered. So just to clarify, no questions were dismissed because we didn't want to address them. It looks like whoever was dismissing just dismissed ones as they were answered. So
And
just wanted
that
to-
was, our staff was keeping up with questions being answered and duplicate questions.
yeah. Okay.
And I'd just like to thank the task force members. I think you guys all did an amazing job. Thank you to Heather for your support and Kimberly as well for guiding us through this whole process. We couldn't have done it without all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to all of our members for being on the call tonight and participating. Your voice matters, and we appreciate everything that you've brought to us today. So with that, we'll say goodnight, and keep the questions coming. We look forward to the vote on November 8th. So thank you and good night.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're good.
So
So I,
are we closed now?
Joanne?
can we
Joanne?
drop our
We have
participants?
22 attendees still in the audience.
Okay, can you, all right. You can stop the recording.
Yeah, we're done with the recording. Yeah.